to every one of you, hundreds of kids in this room, showing up for a Period 1 AP World Review. So we're gonna run through each of the next 5 weeks, all of the AP periods. We're gonna meet next week again and do 2, and then every subsequent week until the week of the exam. We'll handle Period 6, and we're gonna be good to go from there. So for Period 1, we're going all the way back to the earliest time in history. We've got round about 10,000 BCE is when we're going to really start paying attention to AP world history. But we do have to give a brief nod to what comes before that point. And so we're going to go back to the development of some of the earliest human beings originating in Africa around 200,000 years ago. And sometime between maybe 100,000 and 60,000 years, those earliest Homo sapiens make their way out of Africa to populate the rest of the planet. And that is really all you need to know about these earliest eras. The people of this time period in what we call the Paleolithic era, that's like the old Stone Age, the people of this Paleolithic era, they tended to live in relatively small bands of people. They would migrate over many, many thousands of years to populate the entire planet. As they would move, they would use various tools to adapt to the new environments and climates they are moving into. This is often referred to as the out of Africa theory, the idea that human beings originate in Africa, in East Africa, and move out of Africa over many thousands of years. During this time period in the Paleolithic era, there's a couple important technologies that early human beings will develop. The first centers on the use of fire. The mastery of fire by human beings is going to allow these early people to more easily adapt to harsher climates, in particular cold weather climates in the north. So human populations all the way up in the tundra region, you guys know what this is, and like the northern Canada and whatnot, when there was a land bridge connecting northeastern Asia to North America. You got to have fire to live in those areas. Fire is also going to help in hunting and foraging. You can see these dudes here using a little bit of fire to freak out this woolly mammoth. So fire can contribute to better hunts. And then also they provide protection against predators. You light a campfire at your cave and maybe the bad wolf stays out. Over time, these humans are going to develop tools. The tools are very simple. Tools will be using things like bone, wood, stone. We don't really have metalworking yet in this Paleolithic era. These societies, as I mentioned, were hunter-gatherer, or you might see the phrase hunter-forager, to forage for food. Both men and women would take part in the accumulation of food, and rarely would these societies ever accumulate any more food than they can eat in that moment. Because, of course, what happens to hunted food that you don't consume quickly when you don't have a freezer? It's going to spoil. It's going to rot. So you hunt what you need. You gather what you can take with you, and that's about it. These societies tended to be more egalitarian. What do we mean by that? Yeah, very good. There's generally more equality between the genders. And they also were more egalitarian in terms of like class structure. You wouldn't have somebody in the clan who was wildly wealthy and hoarded a bunch of stuff while other people were lacking, because nobody hoarded anything. Why don't you hoard anything in hunter-gatherer societies? Because you can't take it with you. You got to move as you move for the hunt. So if you can't take it with you, you don't accumulate much. We tended to not accumulate a lot of stuff. Societies in these eras were based on kinship clans. societies on in this era were based on kinship clans, so more family, and when we talk about a kinship relationship, you've got brothers and sisters and cousins and grandmas and grandpas, and that's about it. That's about it in one clan. You don't have a lot of people because you can't feed a lot of people. Mothers had fewer children, so you might have only 1 or 2 small children per woman. So families were much smaller. It's kind of the same thing we have right now in our modern society. Families tend to be smaller. Both men and women are contributing to gathering the food, so it's this more egalitarian society. There's also more leisure time for people. Like we would look at an era like this and say, my gosh, I would never want to live in this kind of era, but we're probably working harder day after day than people that lived in the hunter-gatherer society. Studies have been done where more of their time during their days and during their lives certainly was spent on not doing much of anything, rather than like the constant work we have to do in our modern society. So more free time, less labor, less working hours than agricultural societies that will come much later. Coolio? That's all you need to know about anything before the Neolithic era. Okay, that's everything you need to know about before the Neolithic era. Yeah. Yeah, so the question is there more free time when we have surpluses of food? There will be for some people. Please remember that if you're the farmer on an agricultural society, in most agricultural societies, we're not farming just for ourselves, which would be called subsistence farming. We're farming for sale. We're doing a lot of more commercial farming. We're producing stuff to sell to others. So yeah, you're growing a surplus of food that you are now selling to other people who are not growing any food whatsoever, right? So it's not like there's a ton of extra food in society. It's that we don't need as many farmers anymore. And so we'll talk about this in a moment here, the specialization of labor. So the farmers who have to work, they're working day in, day out, day in and night on their fields. And then there's other people that are going to have other jobs in societies. They might not have to be farmers because we don't need that anymore, but they might be working equally long hours. Right now, we have tremendous food surpluses in our societies, but I imagine your parents, many of them are probably working 10, 12-hour days, maybe even longer sometimes. That's far more time than hunter-gatherers would have ever spent hunting and gathering. So it kind of seems like that, but remember when we are creating these food surpluses, we're just having fewer farmers do the work, and other people are doing different kinds of work. They're not necessarily just relaxing. The wealthy, the elite, they might have more leisure time. Throughout human history, there's always an elite that gets to play a little bit more. But the regular people, they work. Cool? All right. Then we come to the Neolithic Revolution. This is probably the biggest event, if not in world history, certainly in period 1, to change the way human beings live their lives, right? Beginning around 10,000 years ago, there is no set date for the Neolithic Revolution. So you can think around 10, maybe 12,000 years ago in some places, and then continuing in other places independently over the next few thousand years. It is this change from hunter-forager societies or hunter-gatherer societies to sedentary agricultural societies. Know that word sedentary. We're not moving from place to place. You're sitting in the same place. Today we would talk about people with a sedentary lifestyle. They sit at their desk all day, or they sit on their couch and watch TV. Don't be sedentary, right? I'm too sedentary sometimes. So some human societies are going to develop into sedentary agricultural societies. That is really important. Just because the Neolithic Revolution happens doesn't mean everybody hops into a Neolithic Revolution mindset. So even when we have sedentary societies, we are going to still have hunter-forager societies. Yes?
So the date around the Neolithic
Yeah.
Revolution, I think was up 10,000
BCE. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And then for thousands of years after in other places, kind of independently. So just because we have sedentary agriculture doesn't mean everybody's going that way. There are still to this day hunter-gatherer bands. There's hardly any left around the world. But there are still hunter-forager bands that live on the planet today in remote areas of the jungles of the Amazon, or in southern Africa, or in like some islands of Indonesia. You still find some of these populations, but they're very small today. In addition to sedentary agricultural societies, we're also going to see the development of pastoral societies. A pastoral society features the raising of animals, the herding and raising of now domesticated animals. And we'll talk more about them in a second. With regard to agricultural societies, we're going to have a tremendous impact on our environment, a far bigger impact on our environment than we would have ever had during the pre-agricultural days, right? In hunter-gatherer societies, we hunt, we gather, but we don't really have that big of an impact on the environment we live in. Once we start farming, what kinds of things are we going to do that will have a tremendous impact on the environment? And you guys can use this for now, the Neolithic Revolution, and then every other agricultural society, which is like all of them up until today. So what kind of impacts does farming have? Cutting down trees to farm, right? And what negative impact can clear-cutting trees and forests have? Okay, could have erosion of soil. Yeah, a lot of times kids talk about like losing air because trees produce oxygen. That's not really that big of a concern. I mean, if we chop down every living plant and tree, then air is going to be an issue. But forests here and there, not going to be a big deal. But erosion of soil, terrible if when you clear cut forests. So that's going to be a big deal. What else? What other impact do we have on the environment when we start farming? What would you say is maybe the irrigation? Very good. I was going to ask what's like the most important thing that a farm would need to thrive, and that's water. And in many parts of the world, we're going to be farming where there's not water like readily available, so we will have to irrigate. We dig trenches and ditches and canals, and we have to channel water away from rivers. And so this is going to have an impact on the natural environment. So recognize like the digging of wells to get access to water, and other irrigation projects like canals. These are things that you're going to have to organize a lot of labor to do. You can't just build your own irrigation canal. Also remember the kanat. Remember we talked about that earlier in the year? That it was like a Persian, and used in Persia and in the Middle East, a channel that you would kind of cut into a hill land and to kind of divert groundwater out of that land. So we're going to have a big impact on the environment. Pastoral societies, they're going to impact the environment in negative ways as well, because they're raising animals, and they're raising large amounts of animals. And what do those animals do? They graze. They eat grass. They poop too. But they eat a lot of grass. So sometimes overgrazing of animals can, again, deplete the flora in an area. When I talk about the flora, what am I talking about? The plant life, very good. And then that can lead to soil erosion and the washing away of good soil. Cool? Cool. All right. With regard to the domestication of flora and fauna, plants and animals, taking wild things and turning them into useful things that human beings can control. This is really the highlight of the Neolithic Revolution, okay? It's going to happen in different parts of the world at somewhat similar times, but first is in what we call the Fertile Crescent or Mesopotamia. It's the land between the rivers. We'll look on this map on the next page to find that Fertile Crescent right up here. Present-day Iraq. The two rivers of the Fertile Crescent are... Very good. Tigris and Euphrates River. So in a place like the Fertile Crescent of the Middle East, of present-day Iraq, they're going to have a number of native grains, things that just kind of grow native to that area. A couple to know are wheat and barley. They're also going to raise goats. Goats are just natural to that area. And so that will become a domesticated animal. Another early location of agriculture is going to be in northern China around the Wanghe River. That's H-W-A-N-G-H-E, the Wanghe River. They're going to have a grain that's native to the area called millet. Further to the south in Southeast Asia, rice will be domesticated. Across the Atlantic Ocean, we've got some early civilizations and early agriculture that'll exist in Mesoamerica, Middle America, and in the Andes Mountains of South America as well. What's the big grain crop in Mexico? What would you think? Maize, corn, yeah, very good. And then in the Andes Mountains, potatoes. And those are two important things to kind of keep in mind of for much later. Like there's no potatoes and corn over here until what big event in world history? You guys are good to go. Columbian Exchange, excellent. So agriculture is going to develop around the world, and out of those areas, those earliest areas that most early developed agriculture, we're going to see the development of human civilization and human societies. This is more people with more food, growing bigger populations, enabling them to produce more food, to grow units of society that are far bigger than those kinship groups that we talked about in the Paleolithic era. So throughout human history, more food equals more people. Okay? Doesn't necessarily mean more farmers. Could be just better farming technology and techniques, and pretty soon we're going to talk about the Green Revolution in period 6. But more food equals more people, and we're going to see that with these earliest societies. And when we have more food and when we have greater populations, we're going to see a few things result. Specialization of labor. Again, we already said, we don't need everybody to farm anymore. And so people can leave the farms and begin to do other jobs in societies. And what kinds of jobs might we see in some of these early societies that are separate from farming? Okay, very good. Governmental jobs. There's going to be rulers, and there's going to be bureaucrats, and there's going to be tax collectors. These are like full-time jobs. What else will we see? Scribes. A scribe is someone who writes stuff down and keeps track of maybe the taxes that people are paying. What did you say? Artisans, very good, and craftsmen, people that like make things that are useful to us. What do you got? Merchants, traders, excellent. People that are maybe taking a lot of the production that the farms are making and selling it on open markets. And there's going to be sailors, and there's going to be soldiers, and there's going to be priests. We didn't mention priests. So there's literally going to be hundreds and eventually thousands and eventually millions of different jobs that people could occupy. And we all live in a world today, right, where we know that there are jobs today that we do that certainly didn't exist 100 years ago, or maybe some didn't even exist 10 years ago, right, that are now here. And so you guys can all imagine that there's going to be jobs 10 years from now that we can't even fathom yet, but they're going to come. So we're going to have the specialization of labor because there's surpluses of food. You don't have to have everybody farming so they can do other jobs. We're also going to see the stratification of society. Please know that word, stratification. It means we're going to start making layers to our society in our social fabric, right? And so there's going to be wealthy, and there's going to be those that have less. There's going to be various class systems or caste systems that will be developed that will separate the society. And it's natural. Remember, hunter-gatherer societies were more egalitarian, right? Because they don't have much stuff. But once we start to accumulate stuff, it's really easy to see some people can get more stuff than others. There's different reasons why this can happen. Sometimes some of us have maybe a lot of stuff because our parents happen to have a lot of stuff. Some people over history might accumulate more stuff because they're stronger and they can physically take it from other people and you're afraid to get it back from them. For whatever reason, once we start accumulating stuff, some people will have more and other people will be less with less. Those that have more stuff, we usually consider them the elites of society. Societies are also going to be patriarchal. That means we're going to see societies that will be male-dominated. All right? I like to talk in my class, and I know you're not in mine, so I'm sure you heard something similar, but I like to talk in my class about that old saying, who brings home the bacon? Classically in American history, dad brought home the bacon while mom might have cooked the bacon in the kitchen. And so, dad kind of ran the house. He brought home the food. We had to really listen to dad. In prehistoric, in Paleolithic times, I should say, both moms and dads, men and women, brought home the bacon, literally and figuratively, right? They both contributed to the food. So that was more of an egalitarian society. Once we move to an agricultural society, it tends to be the males in society that are bringing the wages home, or literally maybe bringing the food home if they are farmers, where women are tending to do what? Stay closer to homes and take care of families, which are now going to start growing much bigger, right? Because unlike in the hunter-forager societies, you've got to feed every mouth. You can't send a little kid off to go and hunt a woolly mammoth. He's going to get smashed, right? But a 3 and 4-year-old kid could be useful on a farm. Could start to do some basic. You can go feed the chickens, and you can go round up something. So children can become your labor, free labor on your farm. They're extra mouths to feed for hunter-gatherer societies, right? So we're going to see a more patriarchal society develop. What I find very interesting now is within our modern society, this post-industrial world that we live in, at least in the United States, we are becoming, would you say we're becoming more or less patriarchal now? I would say we're becoming dramatically less patriarchal now. And women have really every much the same opportunity to earn good wages as men. Of course, there's a debate on whether that is perfectly equal yet. Maybe there's still work to do, but it's far better than it's ever been. And so what are we seeing? More women in the workforce, more women getting like professional jobs and professional degrees, and those women either choosing not to have children or to have children later in life because they've got important jobs they might not want to leave, resulting in smaller families. So really what we're doing is we're seeing there's a connection between how patriarchal a society is and how many children are ultimately going to be had in that society. More patriarchal, more kids. Less patriarchal, fewer children in that society. All right? Questions? This is a picture of something on the book. You guys know what that picture is? That's Hammurabi's code. It's called the Stele of Hammurabi. This is like an obsidian stone that Hammurabi's code is carved into. So Hammurabi's code could be in a lot of different forms. That's just a really famous one right there. Hammurabi's code is a great document to think about when you're thinking about this earliest period in AP world and the class structures and the social structures and the gender structures that are created. Hammurabi's code really lays out the social hierarchies in his time. For example, if a man jabs out the eye of another man, what's going to happen to him? He gets his eye taken out. This is the classic eye for an eye. But if a man jabs out the eye of a common man, like if an aristocratic man jabs out the eye of a common man, well, now he's just got to pay a little bit of money, but he keeps his eyes. Or if he jabs out the eye of a slave, he pays even less, right? If a man kills another man's daughter, well, he's going to have his daughter killed. It's kind of like an eye for an eye thing. But if a man kills a commoner's daughter, he's just going to have to pay a fine. So the Hammurabi's code, this legal system for what civilization was Hammurabi's code? It was in Mesopotamia, do you know, specifically Babylon. Very good, Babylonia. In this Babylonian civilization, it really lays out the social hierarchy that's established and the patriarchy that's established in that society. Coolio. All right. There's also new technological innovations. We don't want to think of technology as just a modern advancement. We can go all the way back to period 1. We talked about before the Neolithic Revolution, we've got fire, and we've got basic tools of wood and bone and stone, right? During the Neolithic era, we start to see more advancements in technology. Not surprising, because what are people not spending all of their time doing? We're not hunting gathering anymore, but we don't have to worry about carrying everything around. If you are a hunter-gatherer society, you don't want to have like a bunch of pots and pans to carry around, because that's really hard. But once we stay in one place, now we can collect pottery and things like this. We're growing food surpluses, so we better have a dude in town that can make pots to store extra grains in, right? So now we're going to have potters, and we're going to construct plows. We've got domesticated cows, right? And they're going to be able to pull a plow. This is from Egypt here. So we're going to have plows developed. We're going to start making cloth. We call these textiles. When you take something like cotton and turn it into a usable cloth, that's a textile industry. That's a technology, the idea of how to weave those cloths. Metallurgy. Know the word metallurgy, the ability to work with metals. All right. One of the earliest metals that human beings started to work with was iron. People known as the Hittites in Mesopotamia were some of the first iron workers in the world. So they're lucky, right? Their civilization happens to exist in a place where there was iron, and they began to work with it, and now they can make iron weapons, which makes them stronger than their neighbors that don't have those iron weapons. Also, wheeled vehicles. The wheel will be invented, and then we're going to put that wheel on like a wagon or on plows or on carts. That's going to help. Does everybody invent things like the wheel? Do you have to have a wheel to be a civilization? Name an advanced civilization that does not have the wheel. Very good. In the Andes Mountain, the Inca, they don't have the wheel in Mesoamerica. Interestingly enough, our archaeologists have found wheels on like little toys that kids might play with, but they never like made bigger versions because they lacked the beasts of burden that could pull those heavy wheeled wagons and such. So there's new technologies, and you guys should be aware of that. We want to associate some names of these civilizations that will develop. The earliest are going to develop around river systems, and we call these the river valley civilizations. We already talked about Mesopotamia between the Tigris and the Euphrates River. Mesopotamia literally means land between the rivers. In Egypt, the other earliest civilization is going to be centered on the Nile River Valley. In northern India, around the Indus River, you should be familiar with the Indus River Valley civilization. Two cities that we have found in the Indus River Valley civilization are Mohenjo-Daro. I'll write that down. I don't think it's on your paper. Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. I think that's Harappa. So the Harappan civilization and Mohenjo-Daro, these are two civilizations in the Indus River Valley civilization. You absolutely should be familiar with those. And then in China, the Wanghe River Valley civilization. These earliest civilizations would develop into large and powerful states. Now, please note, these are not large and powerful states compared to the large and powerful states that will come after. But they're larger and more powerful than anything that had come before. They develop cities, centers of population, that have complex bureaucracies. Bureaucracies, these are just government officials carrying out the will of the ruler. So complex bureaucracies. Religions are going to develop. Roads. And please note that they're all kind of doing the same thing. They'll all have their own flavors, but they're all going to have religion. They're all going to develop roads. They're all going to have rulers and leaders that will organize bureaucratic systems. They will trade with each other. And that's why Mesopotamia is particularly well situated, because a place like Mesopotamian civilizations can trade with Egypt. They also are going to have connections across Persia with the Indus River Valley civilizations. China ends up a little bit more isolated, a little further away, harder to get to. Like, for example, to get from here over to here, you've got some pretty major mountains to traverse. So unless you go north and around the way. But especially Mesopotamia can do a lot of cross-regional or inter-regional trade. There will also be conflicts. Again, as soon as human beings start to accumulate stuff, and that stuff seems to have value, other people are going to want your stuff. And so there's going to be conflicts within states, and that's where legal codes take care of a lot of that issue. Like Hammurabi's Code is going to talk about not stealing from people. The Ten Commandments. It's really just a Jewish legal code, right? It says don't steal from people. But we understand that as soon as we accumulate stuff, we have people wanting to steal. And then wars between civilizations. Some civilizations are going to want the territory of others, and they might have the ability to conquer it, so they might go to war. There are wars both within sedentary civilizations, like between two sedentary civilizations. We will also see wars and conflicts between sedentary and pastoral civilizations. Can you guys give me any example in history of a pastoral civilization that goes to war with sedentary civilizations? Mongols are the classic example, absolutely. So they're a pastoral society that conquer sedentary societies. I want to talk about a couple early states. A state is a powerful governmental system that is able to mobilize surplus labor, to use surplus labor, like extra workers, and mobilize the resources over a larger area. All right? So we're going to see the development of early state systems. Powerful systems that can use surplus labor and accumulate resources over bigger areas. We will often see in these states, whether it be Egypt or Mesopotamia or later Persia, that the rulers will use religion to legitimize their rule. Please know the idea of legitimacy. How does a ruler consolidate his power? How does a ruler convince others he has the right to rule? We often do this through religion, like the gods want me here. Or if you want to go further, I am a god and I have a right to rule. And if you can convince people that you're a god, they're probably going to follow you and listen to you. Some states, of course, are going to end up being a little bit more fortunate than others. Like, why do some states make it and some states fail? Some states are just lucky. We already mentioned the Hittites in Mesopotamia. They happened to exist where iron existed. And they could get that iron and eventually work with that iron, gave them better weapons so they could grow. Okay? Unfortunately for the Hittites, they also exist in an area that has no natural borders to defend it from invaders. So groups like the Assyrians and later the Persians are going to be able to conquer those lands because they don't have great natural barriers. Egypt, on the other hand, Egypt is blessed with an abundance of natural resources in their river, and they're also with good soil because of the flooding of the Nile River Valley, but they've also got great geographic boundaries. They've got a desert, the Sahara Desert to their south and their west. They've got the Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea defending their territory from the north and from the east. So keep in mind how natural borders, natural barriers, or just the luck of geography can help some cities out, some civilizations out. We talked more recently about the Industrial Revolution and why, the Industrial Revolution starts in England. It's not that England is all that special. It's just that, or they're that more talented than others. They just got lucky. They had a lot of coal, and they needed to exploit that coal because they didn't have as many trees, right? Pastoral people will have their own innovations, so we don't want to forget. Often the pastoral people, because they live on the fringes of these major civilizations, they often get forgotten about. But they're doing their own thing that's contributing to civilization, even in sedentary societies. Particularly, they got some new weapons they developed. The compound bow. It's a bow and arrow, but that can shoot more strong and more accurate. The compound bow is going to be developed by pastoral societies, and that'll, of course, spread into settled societies, and also working with some iron weaponry. And much of that's going to spread from pastoral societies into agricultural societies. New modes of transportation. When we think of pastoralists, we think of guys on horseback. So they're the ones that are coming up with a lot of the innovations with horses, whether it be the development of chariots or horseback riding, even something as simple as that. Would you mind go grab that door, please? Culture is another aspect to these early societies that will, in many cases, unify them. We will see in the earliest civilizations architecture being a great centralizer of a society's culture. This is a ziggurat that would be found in what civilization or what part of the world? Mesopotamia. This is a center of religious worship and a center of political leadership for societies like the Babylonians, for example. In Egypt, of course, you guys know about the construction of pyramids as tombs for their dead pharaohs. These massive, monumental pieces of architecture, they can only be created by great societies that can organize their labor. So you need like a strong centralized government to do that. But they also are they become symbols of that society, and they unify the culture. It's something today, people in Egypt are proud of their pyramids, and obviously these are still sites that you can go see in the Middle East today. Other architectural pieces that are built by early civilizations and later civilizations, defensive walls, like to keep outsiders out, and eventually in the classical period we'll talk about the Great Wall of China. Roads, everybody's building roads. Roads are something that societies build to facilitate trade. So that's going to happen as well. We're also going to see religions develop in all of these earliest societies. Whether it be the Vedic religions of India, obviously Mesopotamian and Egyptian religions, Hebrew monotheism. We're going to see religions develop in all of these societies that will unify people. I want to talk about written languages. Originally started for record keeping. Basically, once you have a society that accumulates a lot of stuff, and you're now paying or charging people taxes for your society, you got to keep track of who pays their taxes and all the transactions and trade that the society might be taking part in. So in different parts of the world, we will have different methods to keep records, all right? What you see here, this is called cuneiform. This is from Mesopotamia. Cuneiform writing is like basically by pressing a reed at different angles into like a soft tablet or soft clay. Hieroglyphs, you guys are all familiar with Egyptian hieroglyphics. That's picture writing. Both cuneiform and hieroglyphs are kind of the same way. They're representations of things that people might be doing in their lives that are going to mean something. Eventually, alphabets are developed by that we'll talk about them next Tuesday when we meet, by the Phoenician people that developed the first alphabet. The difference between an alphabet in cuneiform or an alphabet in hieroglyphs, these are kind of pictographic languages where a picture represents an idea. An alphabet is a phonetic language where a symbol like A, B, C, and D represent a sound that we make. And then by putting those symbols together, we can make any words possible. You can see how much easier that is, because like to make up a new word, you'd have to like figure out a new picture, right, to draw that you would have to connect everybody. For new words for us, they're adding new words to the dictionary all the time. We're just combining new letters in ways that they may not have been done before, or maybe we didn't think about it before. This is mentioned because it's used very early on, actually, in Central or South America. The quipu. It's going to come up later when we talk about the Inca. But the quipu, there is no writing in Mesoamerica or in the Incan civilization. So Maya, Aztec, Inca, they don't have a written language, whether it be pictographic or alphabetic. They don't have a written language. So they use, in the Andes Mountains of South America, for example, the system called quipu. This is like a bunch of knots on cords that can be, and if you go into the Chinese room, you guys can see the math from the Inca. There's going to be a picture of this, so check it out. Knots on cords that can represent transactions that might be made, so they can keep track of things that way. I want to close off talking about legal codes that might be created. And we've already mentioned Hammurabi's code. This is just one of many, but it's the one that you would probably use as an example of a way to reflect the existing hierarchies of the society and to establish legal order in that particular society. So Hammurabi's code from Babylon. And then I briefly mentioned religions, Vedic religions in India, which will evolve into Hinduism eventually. Hebrew monotheism, we'll talk about that more next week. But this one God faith, starting with Abraham and moving through the Jewish people up until obviously the present day. And then in Persia, this is a picture of the Zoroastrian god Ahura Mazda. Zoroastrianism in Persia was a major, and it was a monotheistic religion, a one God religion. It becomes important because of its influence on Hebrew monotheism. It has a lot of influence when the Jewish people are taken into the Babylonian captivity. But we'll talk about that next week. That's pretty much all you need to know for for part one, for period one. You will only have 5% of your overall points on the AP exam from period one. Chances are there's only going to be like one set of multiple choice questions. So maybe 3 questions, and then maybe a short answer question from period 1. That's it. If you have a short answer question, it might look like something like this. So we'll take a look at the board here. You might get a question that says, describe one reason that Mesopotamian city-states from like 3000 BC to 500 BC were able to consolidate political power. So there's any number of things that you could say about this, but what kinds of things do you think you could drop in, even after what we just talked about today? What's going to allow a Mesopotamian city-state to consolidate power? That means, how do we become stronger? How does one society become stronger? Okay, very good. You establish legal codes that we get people to follow and that keeps order, that helps consolidate power. Absolutely, that would be good. What else could we drop in? Yeah.
8th grade.
Very good. Oh,
Your bus
well,
is leaving out front. Please head to the front right now before it leaves. 8th grade track. Your bus is out front.
okay, they got it. They got it. The social stratification, how would you directly connect that to consolidation of power?
Well, there's the fact that they can't really rule from the different levels of society, so then, like, the king usually has his own power.
Okay. And or we could at least say that the societies are ruled by elites who have accumulated more wealth and maybe more weaponry that can keep anybody that would challenge that at bay.
How the Hittites used iron.
Very good. Mastery of things like iron to build better weapons that can make you stronger and maybe can allow, if you want to talk about consolidation of power, don't just think about making you stronger and more centralized within your own state. You can also talk about expansion. So you consolidate power by having the ability to expand and conquer your neighbors. Absolutely, that's a good one. By creating wealth through trade, you can talk about that as well. So all kinds of things we can go there. One similarity in the political. So now we can talk about social issues or political issues. Structure of Mesopotamian city-states and the city-state of Athens. Now, this is combining 2 periods. We haven't talked about Athens today. But what do we know about like the way society worked or the way governments worked in a place like Athens? It was a democratic state. Very good. Now, can you think of any way that, because democracy, that was kind of unique for the Athenians. So that probably wouldn't be a good one for similarity. What about a social issue? Now, to my own kids, I always talk about, if you can't think of anything else, there's always a great social similarity that you can come up with any societies throughout almost all history. Very good. So you can talk about socially, the Mesopotamian city-states and Athens, Greece, these were both stark patriarchies where men dominated. There's someone at the door here. And then obviously one difference in the social or political structure in Mesopotamian. Now here's where you could bring up the patriarchal society, or pardon me, the democracy of Athens compared to the monarchies that we would see in Mesopotamian city-states. Remember when you guys are doing short answer questions. Everybody pay attention here real quick. I'm almost done. When you're doing short answer questions, we are going to set these up as 3 independent responses. So on that one page for question 1 for the short answer question, and that's all you're going to get. It's going to be question 1, or you're not going to see anything from this period. You're going to have 1, A, B, and C, and make them all separate, okay? Sometimes they're going to say just describe, or they might say just identify. You have to put it in complete sentences. If it says identify and explain, you're going to have to identify the thing and then give some kind of more detailed explanation. But each one of these answers is going to be probably done in 2, maybe 3 sentences. Probably 2 sentences for most of them. Cool? That's period 1.